channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how you doing? Grab your coffee, maybe a snack, and let's get into it. So, in honor of National Preparedness Month, I'd like to discuss disaster management with you, also known as emergency management or emergency response. Okay, I've already done a video about this, but I wanted to discuss it a little bit further because I feel that it's most important, honestly. Disasters can happen anywhere, at any time, whether they're natural or man-made. And as preppers, we can't focus solely on making sure we have enough food and supplies. We need to make sure we are knowledgeable about what to expect and how to respond to disasters, okay? The goal of disaster preparedness are to be knowledgeable about disasters before they happen and to understand how to use the strategies of prevention, mitigation, preparation, response, recovery. Okay, so let's talk about risk identification. Decide what risks are applicable to you. Okay, the first step in disaster readiness is to understand the risk that you should be focused on. These risks are the scope of your preparedness efforts, and the disasters you are focused on could be far different than the risks that other people focus on. It's a personal assessment of what situations are most likely to occur and which ones are more meaningful to you. For example, depending on your lifestyle, your personal situation, you may consider home fires, car accidents, natural disasters, inflation, food shortages, sudden loss of income, health issues to be perfectly reasonable forms of disaster, all right, that warrant your focus on prevention, mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery planning. One on the more extreme end, some people go far beyond and have disaster management strategy for SHTF situations like nuclear attacks, biochemical attacks, long-term grid outage, max societal collapse, okay, and other apocalyptic situations. And these individuals have decided that they need to have strategies in place to survive or thrive even the most challenging situations, and they deserve respect for that level of effort and focus and dedication that it takes to do so. All right, so keeping that in mind, that disaster planning and risk identification are not pessimistic or being a worrywart. All right, it's not psychologically divergent to realize bad things can happen and that in many situations no one is coming to the rescue. All right, taking proactive steps to understand and to plan for the realities of unfortunate events occurring is smart, and it's a sign of maturity. Identifying and planning your disaster management strategy allows you to have confidence that you and your loved ones will have the best chances of surviving the disaster. Now, speaking on disaster prevention, reducing your risk of harm from an emergency, disaster prevention is another way of saying risk avoidance. Anything you do to get yourself and your family out of the way of potential harm would be considered prevention. You're preventing or lowering the risk of the disaster impacting you directly. Now, disasters come in all shapes, all sizes. They are often unpredictable, but many people still take preventative measures to try and reduce their risk. These measures vary depending on the type of disaster that you personally think has some likelihood of occurring. For example, if you are focused on preventing a home fire, okay, you would make sure to keep your laundry dryer's airflow clear, preventing you from falling victim to a disaster that affects 2,900 homes in the U.S. every single year. Now, there's no way we can even scratch the surface of the prevention strategies for the myriad of situations that can occur. The point is that avoidance and risk reduction to the disaster situations you have personally identified should be your initial focus, okay? As they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, okay? So, talking about mitigation, minimizing the impact of a disaster, whereas the prevention is reducing the likelihood of a disaster directly affecting you. Mitigation is just a fancy word for lowering or minimizing the impact of a disaster when it does occur. So, to illustrate, okay, in the example of preventing home fires, like I was just talking about, we know that we can completely eliminate the chance of a fire occurring, so we also need mitigation strategy. There are a couple of fairly straightforward steps in your mitigation strategy, like fire extinguishers. Escape ladders are a great place to start if you live in an apartment building. Okay. Think about the list of risks that you have identified, as well as your prevention strategies. If there is still a likelihood of the disaster affecting you, think through how you would mitigate, minimize the impact of the disaster or the SHTF scenario. So, preparedness is all about doing what we can now to give us the best outcomes later when a disaster situation occurs. This is when we get to think and we get into things like proactively storing food and water and other supplies and equipment. We've done what we can to prevent being impacted. We've mitigated the impact, and now we stock up on what we will need, and we plan for what we will do. Now, don't let anyone fool you into thinking that preparedness or prepping is fringe, okay? Governments and businesses and individuals, they prepare for the future disasters on a regular basis. Mature companies have entire teams or departments dedicated to disaster readiness planning and preparation. So it's important, actually very, very important. So decide how important it is to you to be able to survive and sustain in a disaster situation, and then how much time, effort, and money you are willing to invest now and over time in order to be prepared. Now, don't get me wrong, not in favor of randomly hoarding in order to survive the aftermath of a disaster. But there's strong proponents in thinking ahead, investing in contingency food and supplies, planning how you'll respond in various disaster situations. There's a big difference between hoarding and preparing. Huge. Now, in addition, many people choose to focus on self-sufficiency as their preparedness strategy. This is an ideal situation for many disaster scenarios, as you would have a sustainable solution, such as living off the grid. But you still need to be prepared with the tools that would allow you to live without electricity and running water. Just some examples. Now, as preppers, it is up to us to determine which paths of preparedness we choose to take for ourselves and our families. The point is to think it through and decide on the strategies that make the best sense for the situation. And this is when your preparations come to fruition. This is when your extra food, your supplies, may save your life. And you take action on the plans you have in place from the prior section. If you are using, you guys know that organization and inventory is essential when it comes to your preps. Okay? I myself, I use Prepper Nerd. Okay? Love it. Suggest it. You need it. But that's just me. Okay? I think that Mike is a genius when he came up with this offline inventory system. I think it's wonderful. Okay? Now, if you're using his system, it's called the Ultimate Prep System, you'll know exactly how long you and your family have the sustenance you need in order to get you into the recovery phase. Okay? Now, it's no surprise that following a disaster, people need food, they need water, they need shelter, okay? But the immediate needs of people are often not met until days after the disaster has occurred. So, with emergency response organizations in place like FEMA, all right, people can be given immediate aid to sustain themselves while they wait for other relief to arrive. Now, a disaster relief agency other than FEMA may provide immediate assistance like the Red Cross, but still, it cannot provide the long-term services necessary for people to return to their communities and resume their normal lives. So, have you considered joining like a local community emergency management committee? Or starting one in your own neighborhood? Similar to like a neighborhood watch, but focused on getting your community or your neighborhood through a disaster. Okay? Now, individual commitment to a group effort, that is what makes something like this, like teamwork. That's how it works, okay? A company works, society works, civilization work, okay? You need a group effort, okay? Now, when a disaster strikes, you immediately take responsive actions based on your plan, your preparedness plan, okay? Once the situation starts to settle, you move into what's called the recovery phase. You're rebuilding, okay? Homes, systems, communities, etc. Anything that's going to get you into a sense of normalcy. A disaster is not just an event that happens, it's a persistent condition where the previous conditions of life are difficult or impossible to sustain in the long term. So, one consideration as you build toward recovery after a disaster scenario is the use of lumber. Okay, lumber is the raw material used in many construction projects. In the wake of a disaster, people need to see it is an opportunity to reuse wood. Now, there are many ways to reuse lumber in construction and rebuilding homes in an environmentally safe manner. A house can be constructed and set from salvaged materials as well, making it more affordable, sustainable. Okay? Now, a lot of people think having a large inventory of supplies means that they're prepared for disaster. Nay, nay. Having supplies is one ingredient of being prepared. There are steps that are even more fundamental, like risk identification, prevention and mitigation. And sometimes people overlook the need to plan. We need plans to get us through right before, during, and after a disaster. Okay? So, stay prepared, my friends and family. I love you. I'll see you in the next one. You stay safe. You stay positive. You keep prepping. And as always, fear less.